My name is Robert, and I'm 62 years old. Right now, I'm sitting in this small rented room looking out the window at a parking lot that's seen better days. Just 3 months ago, I thought I had it all figured out. My son Bradley had found me a job, said he was looking out for me. I smiled and agreed, grateful that my boy still cared about his old man. I thought I was doing what was best for everyone when I agreed to his plan. But sometimes the people you love most are the ones who hurt you deepest. What I discovered about why he really wanted me working changed everything between us forever. Before I tell you what really happened, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe because you won't believe the twist in this story. Trust me, you'll want to see how a father's love can turn into the perfect lesson in respect. I guess I should start from the beginning, back when I thought I understood my place in this world. For 35 years, I worked at Johnson Manufacturing in Cleveland, Ohio. Every morning at 6 sharp, I'd clock in and spend my days operating heavy machinery, building parts for automobiles. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest work, and it paid the bills. My wife Martha and we had a good life. We bought our little 2-bedroom house in 1987, painted it yellow, because Martha said it looked like sunshine. We raised our son Bradley there, watched him graduate high school, then college. Martha was so proud when he got that job at the insurance company. She'd tell everyone at the grocery store about her boy in his suit and tie. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. 3 years ago, Martha started getting tired all the time. At first, we thought it was just age catching up with her. She was 58 after all. But when she started losing weight and couldn't keep food down, I knew something was seriously wrong. The diagnosis hit us like a freight train. Stage 3 pancreatic cancer. The doctors said if we'd caught it earlier maybe, but by then, it had already spread. Martha fought hard for 18 months, but the medical bills ate up everything we'd saved for retirement. Insurance covered some of it, but not nearly enough. By the time she passed, I'd spent every penny of our nest egg trying to keep her comfortable. After the funeral, the house felt impossibly empty. 43 years of marriage, and suddenly, I was eating dinner alone, watching television alone, going to bed, in a room that still smelled like her perfume. Bradley and his wife Cheryl lived about 20 minutes away with their 2 kids, Emma and Jake, ages 7 and 5. In those first few months after losing Martha, I'll admit I became a regular visitor at Bradley's house. Maybe too regular. I'd show up around dinner time, always with some excuse. I needed to borrow a tool, or I'd picked up something for the grandkids at the store. Really, I just didn't want to go home to that empty house and heat up another frozen dinner. At first, Bradley seemed happy to have me around. We'd sit on his back porch after dinner drinking beer and talking about work or sports or whatever came to mind. Cheryl would bring us coffee and dessert. The kids would climb all over their grandpa, begging for stories about the old days. But as weeks turned into months, I started noticing little things. Cheryl's smile seemed forced when she opened the door. She'd glance at the clock when I arrived, and I caught her whispering urgently to Bradley in the kitchen more than once. The conversations on the porch got shorter. The invitations to stay for dessert became less frequent. I should have taken the hint, but grief makes you selfish sometimes. I needed that connection to family, that reminder that I wasn't completely alone in the world. So I kept showing up, kept pretending I didn't notice the tension building in that house like storm clouds on the horizon. The end came on a Friday evening in late September. I remember it was unusually warm for that time of year, and the leaves were just starting to turn. I'd had a particularly lonely day, spent most of it organizing Martha's things in closets I couldn't bring myself to clean out completely. By 5 o'clock, I couldn't stand my own company anymore. I drove over to Bradley's house without calling first, which had become my habit. When I pulled into the driveway, I could see them through the kitchen window. Cheryl was at the stove, Bradley was helping Emma with homework at the table, and little Jake was coloring in a book on the floor. It looked like a Norman Rockwell painting, the perfect American family. But when I walked up to the front door and knocked, the scene changed instantly. Through the glass, I watched Cheryl's shoulders tense up. She said something sharp to Bradley, who glanced toward the door with an expression I'd never seen before. Annoyance, frustration. It cut deeper than I expected. Cheryl opened the door with that same forced smile I'd been seeing for weeks. "Oh, hi, Robert. We weren't expecting you tonight." "I know, sweetheart. I was just in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by to see my favorite grandkids." It was a lie, of course. I'd driven straight from my house with no other stops, but I needed some dignity in that moment. Bradley appeared behind his wife, and I could see they'd been in the middle of serving dinner. Roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans. It smelled incredible, and my stomach growled audibly. I'd been surviving on sandwiches and soup for days. "Dad, we were just sitting down to eat," Bradley said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Cheryl only made enough for the four of us." The message was clear, but I was too proud and too hungry to accept it gracefully. "That's fine, son. I'll just visit with the kids for a few minutes." What followed was one of the most uncomfortable hours of my life. I sat in their living room while they ate dinner in the kitchen. I could hear every clink of silverware, every word of their conversation. Emma asked why Grandpa wasn't eating with them, and Cheryl's response was a mumbled excuse about me not being hungry. After they finished eating and the kids went upstairs to play, Bradley joined me in the living room. He sat on the edge of his recliner, hands clasped between his knees, looking like he was preparing for surgery. "Dad, we need to talk." The words hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. "What's on your mind, son?" Bradley took a deep breath and looked toward the kitchen, where Cheryl was cleaning dishes with more vigor than necessary. "I need to be honest with you. We can't keep doing this." "Doing what?" "This whole routine. You coming over every few days, staying for dinner, hanging around until late. It's becoming a problem." I felt my chest tighten, but I kept my voice steady. "I didn't realize I was causing problems. I just enjoy spending time with my family." "I know, Dad. I know you're lonely since Mom died, and I understand that. But Cheryl feels like we're constantly feeding an extra mouth, and it's affecting our budget. We're trying to save money, maybe buy a bigger house, and every time you come over, it throws off our meal planning and grocery budget." The words hit me like a physical blow. An extra mouth. That's what I'd become to my own family. Not a beloved father and grandfather, but a burden. A financial inconvenience. Bradley must have seen the hurt in my eyes because he quickly continued, "That's why I've been thinking about this, and I found you a job." "A job?" I was 62, collecting a modest pension from the factory. I hadn't looked for work in decades. "It's perfect for someone your age, Dad. Part-time, not too demanding. It's at a place called Peterson's Storage, just a small warehouse operation. The owner needs someone reliable to help with inventory and customer service. It pays $12 an hour, which isn't bad for light work." I stared at my son, trying to process what was happening. He was essentially paying me to stay away from his house, finding me busy work so I wouldn't be an extra mouth at his dinner table. "The best part is, it's an afternoon shift," Bradley continued, warming to his theme. 3 to 8 Monday through Friday. It'll give you something to do, help you meet people, maybe make some friends your own age. Friends my own age. As if I were some kind of elderly child who needed playdates arranged by his adult son. But what choice did I have? I could rage and storm out, burn bridges with the only family I had left. or I could swallow my pride and accept this job that my son had arranged to keep me at arm's length. I looked around their comfortable living room at the family photos where I appeared less and less frequently in recent years at the life they'd built that apparently had no room for a lonely widower. "That's very thoughtful of you, Bradley," I said, finally, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. "When do I start?" The relief on his face was immediate and obvious. "Monday morning. I'll drive you over there at 2:30 to meet the owner, Pete Peterson. You'll like him, Dad. He's a good guy." As I drove home that night, my hands were shaking on the steering wheel. Not from anger, though that would come later. From the devastating realization that I'd become exactly what every parent fears, a burden to their children. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching my mood perfectly. I woke up at 5:30, same as I had for 35 years at the factory, even though I didn't need to be at Peterson's storage until 3 in the afternoon. Old habits die hard, I guess. I spent extra time getting ready that morning, ironing a pair of khakis and a blue button-down shirt until they were crisp and professional. If I was going to do this job that my son had arranged to keep me busy and away from his house, I was going to do it right. Peterson's storage sat in an industrial park on the outskirts of Cleveland, tucked between a tire shop and a place that repaired commercial refrigerators. The building was smaller than I'd expected, maybe 10,000 square feet, with a parking lot that had definitely seen better days. Potholes dotted the asphalt like craters and weeds pushed up through cracks in the pavement. Bradley pulled up next to my car at exactly 2:30, punctual as always. We walked toward the building together, and I noticed he seemed nervous, checking his watch and straightening his tie. "Remember, Dad, this is a good opportunity. Pete Peterson is doing you a favor by giving you a chance." A favor. Right. I was beginning to understand that everything in my new life was going to be framed as people doing me favors. The inside of Peterson's storage was bigger than it looked from outside, with high ceilings and neat rows of industrial shelving filled with boxes, furniture, and equipment. It was clean and well organized, not the dusty warehouse I'd been expecting. Pete Peterson emerged from a small office in the back corner, and I liked him immediately. He was probably 70 years old, with white hair, kind eyes, and hands that showed decades of honest work. He wore jeans and a flannel shirt, and his handshake was firm and genuine. "You must be Robert," he said with a smile that reached his eyes. "Bradley told me all about you on the phone." I wondered exactly what Bradley had told him, but I just nodded and returned the handshake. "This is my dad," Bradley said, and there was something in his tone I couldn't quite identify. Pride, relief. Guilt. Pete gave Bradley a look that lasted just a second longer than necessary, then turned his attention back to me. "Well, Robert, let me show you around and explain what we do here." For the next 20 minutes, Pete walked me through the operation. Peterson's storage wasn't just a warehouse. They provided storage solutions for small businesses, handled inventory for online retailers, and offered packing and shipping services. It was more sophisticated than I'd expected. "The work isn't difficult," Pete explained as we walked between the shelves. "Mostly organizing inventory, helping customers find what they need, some light lifting. The computer system is pretty simple once you get the hang of it." Bradley checked his watch again. "I should get going. Dad, Pete will take good care of you." After my son left, Pete poured 2 cups of coffee from a pot that looked like it had been brewing since the Carter administration. "So," he said, settling behind his desk, "Bradley tells me you recently lost your wife. I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you. It's been an adjustment." Pete nodded slowly. "I lost my Helen 4 years ago. 46 years of marriage. The house gets pretty quiet, doesn't it? Something in his tone told me he understood loneliness in a way that Bradley never could. It does indeed. Bradley mentioned you might be feeling a bit, what was the word he used? Unmoored since your retirement. Said you needed something to give you a sense of purpose. Unmoored. That was a diplomatic way to put it. I wondered what else Bradley had said about his father, who'd become an inconvenience. He also mentioned that you've been spending a lot of time at their house and maybe it would be good for everyone if you had something to keep you busy. The coffee suddenly tasted bitter in my mouth. Pete's eyes were kind, but I could see the pity there. He knew exactly why I was sitting in his office. Mr. Peterson, I appreciate the opportunity, but I want you to know that if you're doing this as a favor to my son, you don't need to worry about hurting my feelings. Pete was quiet for a long moment, studying me over his coffee cup. Then he said something that surprised me. Robert, your son did call me about a job for you, but he also did something else. What's that? He paid me 2 months' salary in advance. Said he wanted to make sure I'd give you a real chance and not just busy work. The room seemed to tilt slightly. He paid you $800. Said his father was a good man who just needed to feel useful again, and he wanted to invest in that. I set my coffee cup down carefully, afraid my hands might start shaking again. Bradley hadn't just found me a job to keep me away from his dinner table. He'd paid someone to employ me, like I was some kind of charity case. I see, I managed to say. Pete leaned forward in his chair. Now I want you to know something. I kept that money, but not for the reason you might think. I kept it because I actually do need help around here, and if your son is willing to guarantee your first 2 months while you learn the ropes, that tells me he believes in you. It was a kind way to frame it, but I wasn't fooled. My son had essentially bought me a babysitter. The question is, Pete continued, do you want to prove him right, or do you want to prove him wrong? Before I could answer, a woman's voice called from the front of the warehouse. Pete, Mrs. Rodriguez is here for her dining room set. That's Dorothy, Pete explained, standing up. She works here part-time, handles most of our customer service. Come meet her. Dorothy turned out to be a woman about my age, maybe 58 or 59, with gray-streaked brown hair and laugh lines around her eyes. She wore jeans and a Peterson storage polo shirt, and she was patiently explaining storage options to a customer who seemed confused about the difference between climate-controlled and regular units. After the customer left, Pete introduced us. Dorothy, this is Robert. He's going to be working afternoons helping us get caught up on inventory. Dorothy sized me up quickly, the way people do when they're trying to figure out if you're going to make their job easier or harder. Nice to meet you, Robert. You ever worked in storage before? No, ma'am, but I'm a quick learner. She smiled at that, and I got the sense she approved of the ma'am. A lot of people my age had stopped using basic courtesy, but I was raised to respect women, especially women who worked hard for a living. Well, if you can handle Pete's filing system, you can handle anything. Man organizes like a tornado hit a library. Pete laughed. Dorothy keeps me honest. Been here 3 years now, ever since her husband passed. I caught the significance of that immediately. Another widow, another person trying to figure out what to do with the rest of their life after losing the person who'd defined it for decades. As Pete showed me the computer system and Dorothy explained the customer database, I found myself relaxing for the first time in months. These were good people doing honest work, and there was something comforting about the routine of it all. But underneath that comfort was a burning question that I couldn't shake if my son was willing to pay someone to keep me busy. What did that say about how he really saw me by the end of that first day? I'd decided to find out. 2 weeks into the job at Peterson's Storage, I was settling into a routine that surprised me with its satisfaction. The work was straightforward, but engaging. The customers were generally pleasant, and Dorothy had become the kind of friend I didn't know I needed. She had a sharp wit and didn't suffer fools gladly, but she was kind to people who deserved kindness. Pete, meanwhile, had turned out to be one of the most genuine men I'd ever met. He'd started the business 12 years earlier after retiring from 30 years as a high school shop teacher. His wife Helen had handled the books and customer service until her death from a heart attack 4 years ago. Since then, he'd been running the place with Dorothy's help and whatever part-time workers he could find. The strange thing was, I was actually good at this job. My years at the factory had taught me how to organize efficiently and pay attention to details. I could spot inventory discrepancies that others missed, and I had a knack for helping customers figure out exactly what they needed without overselling them. But the whole time I was learning to use the computer system and memorizing the layout of the warehouse, one thing nagged at me. That conversation with Pete on my first day kept replaying in my mind. Bradley had paid 2 months' salary in advance. Why would he do that, unless he thought I couldn't hold down a job on my own merit? The answer came during what I thought was a casual conversation with Pete on my second Wednesday. We were having lunch together in his small office, sharing sandwiches and watching the rain streak down the single window that faced the parking lot. "You know, Robert, I have to tell you something," Pete said, unwrapping what looked like a turkey sandwich that had seen better days. "When your son first called me, I wasn't sure what to expect." "What do you mean, Shaw?" Pete took a bite of his sandwich and chewed thoughtfully before answering. "Well, he told me his father had been coming around the house a lot since losing his wife. Said you seemed lost, maybe a little desperate for company." I set my own sandwich down, my appetite suddenly gone. Desperate. Those weren't my words, Robert. But Bradley painted a picture of a man who was becoming, how did he put it? A bit of a burden on the family. He said you'd show up at dinner time without calling, stay late into the evening, and that his wife was getting frustrated with the extra expense and the disruption to their routine. Each word hit like a small punch to the gut. This was how my son described me to strangers. Not as a grieving widower who missed his family, but as a desperate old man who couldn't take a hint. He also said something else, Pete continued, and his voice got gentler. He said he loved you, but he needed to find a way to give you purpose and independence without hurting your feelings. That's why he offered to pay those first 2 months. He said he wanted to make sure you had time to prove yourself without the pressure of needing the income right away. I stared out the window at the rain and tried to process this information. On one hand, it sounded like Bradley did care about my feelings and wanted me to succeed. On the other hand, he'd essentially told a stranger that I was a burden who needed to be managed. "There's one more thing," Pete said quietly. "Bradley asked me to keep you busy here as much as possible. He suggested that if the job worked out, maybe I could offer you more hours, more responsibilities. He said keeping his father occupied and feeling useful would be worth the investment." The word occupied stuck in my throat like a bone. I wasn't an employee. I was a problem that needed to be solved, a lonely old man who required entertainment to keep him from bothering the real family. That evening, I sat in my small apartment and really thought about my situation for the first time since Martha died. Here I was, 62 years old, collecting a pension from 35 years of hard work, and my son was paying someone to babysit me because I'd become inconvenient to his life. The hurt was deep, but underneath the hurt was something else. Something that felt like anger, but cleaner and more focused. I realized that Bradley saw me as weak and dependent, someone who needed to be managed rather than respected. Maybe it was time to show him who his father really was. Over the next few days, I started paying closer attention to conversations around Peterson's storage. Pete mentioned that business had been growing steadily, but he was getting tired of handling all the administrative work himself. Dorothy talked about wanting more hours, but said Pete couldn't afford to pay her full-time wages. Most interesting of all, I learned that Peterson's storage was actually quite successful. We had a steady stream of business customers, and the monthly storage fees provided reliable income. Pete had been conservative in his growth, but there was clearly room for expansion. An idea began forming in my mind. It was risky, maybe even a little crazy, but it would certainly prove to my son that his father wasn't the helpless old man he thought I was. I decided to do some research of my own. That weekend, I drove around Cleveland, looking at other storage facilities, taking note of their pricing services and customer reviews I found online at the local library. I visited 3 of Peterson's competitors posing as a potential customer and learned quite a bit about the local market. What I discovered was that Peterson's storage was underpriced for the quality of service we provided. Pete's prices hadn't been updated in 2 years, even though demand was clearly strong. We consistently had a waiting list for the climate-controlled units, which told me we could charge premium rates. More importantly, I realized that Pete's biggest weakness wasn't his prices or his location. It was his reluctance to invest in growth. He was running the business like a hobby instead of treating it like the profitable enterprise it could become. By Sunday night, I had the outline of a business plan that could double Peterson's revenue within a year. The question was whether I had the courage to propose it. Monday morning, I called Pete and asked if I could come in early to discuss something important. When I arrived at 10 o'clock, he was already there working on paperwork that looked like it had been piling up for weeks. "What's on your mind, Robert?" I took a deep breath and jumped off the cliff. "Pete, I think you're sitting on a gold mine, and you don't even know it." For the next hour, I walked him through my analysis of the local storage market, showed him my research on competitor pricing, and explained my ideas for expanding the business. I suggested raising prices on premium services, adding new revenue streams like moving and packing services, and investing in better marketing to fill our capacity faster. Pete listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or asking clarifying questions. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Robert, this is impressive work. Really impressive. But I'm 70 years old. I don't know if I have the energy to grow this business the way you're describing. What if you didn't have to do it alone?" That's when I made the proposal that would change everything. I offered to buy into Peterson's storage as a partner. I had some money from Martha's life insurance policy, plus the proceeds from selling some investments we'd made over the years. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to fund the expansion I had in mind. In exchange for a 40% stake in the business, I'd invest my own money and take over the day-to-day operations, allowing Pete to step back gradually while still maintaining majority ownership. "You'd be willing to waste your own money on this place?" Pete asked. "I'd be willing to risk my own money on us," I corrected. "You, me, and Dorothy. We're a good team." Pete stood up and walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back. "Can I ask you something, Robert? This doesn't have anything to do with proving something to your son, does it?" The question caught me off guard, but Pete deserved an honest answer. "Maybe partly," I admitted. "But mostly, it's because I've found something here that I didn't expect to find. Purpose. Respect. A chance to build something instead of just occupying time until I die." Pete turned around and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Your son thinks he was doing you a favor by getting you this job. My son thinks I need to be managed like a child. And you want to show him he's wrong. I want to show him who his father actually is. Pete nodded slowly. Well then, I guess we better get started. Selling my house was harder than I'd expected, not because of the real estate market, but because of the memories soaked into every room. Martha and I had bought that little yellow house 36 years earlier, when Bradley was just starting kindergarten, and everything seemed possible. I spent 3 weeks going through closets and drawers sorting through a lifetime of accumulation. Photo albums, report cards, Christmas ornaments, love letters Martha had written me during my brief deployment to Germany in the 80s. Every object told a story, and most of those stories ended with Martha. But I was determined to do this right. I hired a professional stager who helped me pack away the personal items and arrange the furniture to make the rooms look bigger and brighter. When we put it on the market in early December, it sold within a week for $180,000, $30,000 more than I'd expected. The money gave me options I hadn't had since Martha's illness ate up our savings. More importantly, it gave me the capital I needed to become Pete's partner and transform Peterson's storage into something bigger and better. While the house sale was being finalized, Pete and I worked on our partnership agreement with a lawyer Dorothy recommended. We structured it so that I'd invest $60,000 for a 40% stake with an option to buy Pete out completely when he was ready to retire. In exchange, I'd take over operations, implement the expansion plan, and handle the day-to-day management. Dorothy was thrilled when we told her about the partnership. Not only would her hours increase to full-time, but we promised her a small ownership stake if the business met our growth projections over the next 2 years. By January, we were ready to implement Phase 1 of the expansion. We raised prices on our premium services by 15%, which actually increased demand because customers associated higher prices with better quality. We added moving and packing services, partnering with a local moving company to provide complete storage solutions. Most importantly, we invested in a real marketing strategy. I'd learned enough about online advertising to get us listed properly on Google and set up social media accounts. We started getting customers from all over the Cleveland metro area, not just our immediate neighborhood. The results were better than I'd dared hope. By March, our monthly revenue had increased by 60%, and we were consistently booked to capacity. Pete was amazed by the transformation, and even more amazed by how much he enjoyed stepping back and watching the business thrive under younger management. But the real test of my transformation came on a Thursday evening in late March, when my phone rang, and Bradley's name appeared on the screen. "Dad, I need to talk to you about something important." I could hear stress in his voice, which was unusual for Bradley. He'd always been the type to keep his problems to himself, even as a kid. "What's going on, son? Can I come over to your place tonight if possible? It's about money." An hour later, Bradley was sitting in my small apartment, looking more uncomfortable than I'd seen him since his teenage years. He kept fidgeting with his wedding ring and avoiding eye contact. "Dad, I'm in trouble. Financial trouble." I waited for him to continue remembering all the times he'd lectured me about being patient and letting people finish their thoughts. "Cheryl and I bought that new SUV last year, and we took out a bigger mortgage when we refinanced the house. We thought my promotion was going to come through, but it didn't. Now we're behind on payments, and the bank is threatening to foreclose." Bradley's voice was getting smaller as he spoke, like he was shrinking into himself. "How much do you need?" I asked. $25,000. "I know it's a lot, Dad, but we don't have anywhere else to turn. Cheryl's parents already said no, and my credit is maxed out." I looked at my son, really looked at him for the first time in months. He was 32 years old, supposedly a successful insurance agent, but he was sitting in my apartment begging his retired father for money because he'd made poor financial decisions. "Why should I help you, Bradley?" The question clearly caught him off guard. What do you mean? I mean the last time we had a serious conversation, you told me I was an extra mouth to feed and found me a job to keep me away from your house. Now you want me to give you $25,000. I'm curious about your reasoning. Bradley's face went red. Dad, that's not... I never said you were an extra mouth. I said Cheryl felt like we were feeding an extra mouth, which is different. Is it? Yes, it is. And I found you that job because I thought it would be good for you. Give you something to do, help you meet people. By paying my employer to keep me busy. The silence that followed was deafening. Bradley stared at me with his mouth slightly open like he was seeing his father for the first time. How did you find out about that? Pete told me. He's an honest man, something I'm beginning to realize runs in short supply in this family. Bradley stood up and started pacing around my small living room. Dad, I was trying to help you. You were showing up at our house all the time, and Cheryl was getting frustrated, and I thought if you had a job, it would solve everyone's problems. Everyone's problems. Not my problems. Everyone's problems. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean, Bradley? Because from where I sit, it looks like you saw your grieving father as an inconvenience and decided to pay someone to babysit him. My son stopped pacing and looked at me with something that might have been respect for the first time in years. You're different, he said quietly. How so? Stronger. More, I don't know. More like yourself, I guess. I considered this observation. Maybe I just stopped trying to be who you wanted me to be. What does that mean? It means I'll loan you the $25,000, but there are going to be conditions. Bradley's relief was visible, but he was smart enough to be cautious. What kind of conditions? You're going to work for it. Not at the insurance company. At Peterson's storage. $10 an hour, which is what we pay entry-level employees. You'll work weekends and evenings until you've earned back every penny. Dad, that would take me over 2 years. 2 years and 3 months, actually, assuming you work 20 hours a week. Of course, if you worked more hours, you'd pay it back faster. Bradley sat down heavily in my one good chair. This is crazy. I have a career, a professional job. I can't be loading boxes in a warehouse. Then I guess you don't need the money that badly. We stared at each other across my small living room, and I realized this was the first time in years that I held all the power in a conversation with my son. Why are you doing this to me? He asked quietly. I'm not doing anything to you, Bradley. I'm offering you the same thing you offered me. A job. A chance to earn money through honest work. The only difference is I'm not going to pretend it's for your own good. This is revenge, isn't it? You're angry about the job thing, so you're trying to humiliate me. I thought about that for a moment. Was this revenge? Maybe partly. But it was something else, too. Bradley, do you remember what you said to me that night at your house? You said you didn't want to keep feeding an extra mouth. Well, now you're the extra mouth. And if you want to be fed, you're going to have to work for it. My son was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands. When he finally looked up, there were tears in his eyes. I never meant to hurt you, Dad. I really thought I was helping. I know you did, son. But helping and controlling aren't the same thing. And respect isn't something you can buy for $12 an hour. That Saturday morning, Bradley showed up at Peterson's storage wearing work clothes and an expression of grim determination. Pete and Dorothy had agreed to the arrangement, partly because we actually did need weekend help, and partly because they were curious to see how this family drama would play out. I put Bradley to work in receiving unloading trucks and organizing inventory. It was physical work, the kind of job he hadn't done since high school, and he was exhausted after the first 4 hours. During his lunch break, he called Cheryl from the parking lot. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I could see him gesturing animatedly through the window. When he came back inside, his attitude had changed. The resentment was still there, but underneath it was something that looked like determination. "How long did you say this would take?" he asked. 2 years and 3 months at 20 hours a week. Less if you work more hours. Bradley nodded slowly. Then I guess I better get back to work. 18 months later, I was sitting in the same chair in my apartment, but everything else had changed. Peterson's Storage had become one of the most successful storage facilities in Cleveland, with a second location under construction and a waiting list for our premium services. Dorothy had been promoted to general manager and was thriving in her new role. She'd also become something more than a friend to me, though we were taking things slowly. At our age, we both understood that the best relationships are built on friendship and mutual respect, not just romance. Pete had gradually stepped back from day-to-day operations, though he still came in a few mornings a week to handle the books and offer advice. He'd started talking about selling me his remaining 60% stake within the next 2 years, which would make me the sole owner of a business worth well over $500,000. But the biggest change was in my relationship with Bradley. Working at Peterson's Storage had been harder on him than either of us expected, not because of the physical labor, but because it forced him to see me as his employer rather than his dependent father. For the first few months, he was sullen and resentful, doing the minimum work required, and making it clear he considered the whole arrangement beneath his dignity. But gradually, as he learned the business and started taking on more responsibility, something shifted. Bradley turned out to have excellent organizational skills and a natural talent for customer service. Within 6 months, I'd promoted him to weekend supervisor, and by the end of the first year, he was handling our online marketing and helping to design the layout for our second location. More importantly, the dynamic between us had completely changed. Instead of treating me like a lonely old man who needed managing, Bradley started asking my advice about business decisions and personal finances. He stopped making excuses for Cheryl's behavior and started setting boundaries with his wife about family priorities. The day he made his final payment, 18 months after we'd started this arrangement, I called him into Pete's old office for a conversation I'd been planning for weeks. "Congratulations," I said, handing him a receipt marked "Paid in Full." "You've officially worked off your debt." Bradley looked at the paper for a long moment, then folded it carefully and put it in his wallet. "Dad, I owe you more than money." "What do you mean?" "I mean I owe you an apology. A real one, not the half-hearted excuses I've been making for the past year and a half." I waited for him to continue. "When Mom died, I was scared. Scared of losing you, too scared of having to take care of you, scared of what it would mean for my own family. So I convinced myself that you were the problem, that you were needy and dependent and getting in the way of our lives." Bradley's voice was getting stronger as he spoke, like he was finally finding words he'd been looking for. "But working here, seeing what you built, watching you turn this place into something amazing, I realized I had it backwards. You weren't the one who was needy and dependent. I was." "Bradley." "No, let me finish. I was so dependent on seeing you as weak that I couldn't handle it when you showed strength. I was so dependent on being the successful son that I couldn't admit when I needed help. And I was so dependent on controlling everything in my life that I tried to control you too. I looked at my son and saw something I hadn't seen since he was a child, genuine humility. When you made me work for that loan, I thought you were just being cruel. But you were teaching me something I should have learned a long time ago. That respect isn't something you inherit from your parents. It's something you earn through your actions. And what else did you learn? Bradley smiled, and for the first time in years, it was completely genuine. I learned that my father is one hell of a businessman, and I'm proud to work for him. 3 months later, Cheryl finally worked up the courage to visit me at my apartment. She brought homemade cookies and an apology that was awkward but sincere. She admitted that she'd been jealous of the time Bradley spent with me after Martha died, worried that having a grieving father-in-law around would interfere with her plans for their family. "I made Bradley choose between his wife and his father," she said quietly. "That wasn't fair to either of you." We talked for 2 hours that afternoon, really talked for the first time since Bradley had brought her home from college 15 years earlier. By the end of the conversation, we'd established a foundation for rebuilding our relationship. Now our Sunday dinners happen at my apartment, where there's always enough food and everyone is genuinely welcome. Emma and Jake love visiting Grandpa's place because I let them help me with simple tasks around Peterson's storage, and they're fascinated by the business side of things. Bradley has become my unofficial successor at the company, learning every aspect of the operation and contributing ideas that have helped us stay ahead of our competition. When Pete finally decides to retire completely, Bradley will take over as general manager, while I handle the strategic planning and expansion. Dorothy and I have been dating for 8 months now, taking weekend trips to places Martha and I never got to visit. We're talking about moving in together, maybe buying a small house with a garden where we can grow tomatoes and watch grandchildren play in the yard. But the most important thing I learned through this whole experience is that dignity isn't something other people can give you or take away from you. It's something you claim for yourself through your actions and your refusal to accept being treated as less than you are. When Bradley told me I was an extra mouth to feed, he was really telling me that I'd become someone who could be dismissed and managed rather than respected and valued. The job at Peterson's storage was supposed to keep me busy and out of the way, a kind of expensive daycare for inconvenient parents. Instead, it became the foundation for reclaiming my identity as a man who could build something meaningful and earn respect through his contributions rather than his need for accommodation. I learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even with people who hurt you. Sometimes the best revenge is simply showing them who you really are when you stop trying to be who they want you to be. Most importantly, I learned that being a burden and being needed are two very different things. When you're a burden, people tolerate you out of obligation. When you're needed, people value you because of what you bring to their lives. At 64 years old, I'm needed again. By my business, by my employees, by my customers, and yes, by my family. But this time, it's not because I'm lonely or desperate or looking for someone to take care of me. It's because I have something valuable to offer, something I built with my own hands and my own mind. That makes all the difference in the world. So let me ask you something. Have you ever felt like a burden to the people you love? Have you ever been in a situation where family members tried to manage you instead of respecting you? And what did you do about it? Share your story in the comments below, because I'd love to hear how others have handled similar situations. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family challenges and finding dignity in unexpected places. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that it's never too late to reclaim your respect and rebuild your relationships on your own terms. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that sometimes the people who try to limit you are really just showing you how much potential you have to surprise them.